The evening sky painted itself in shades of amber and gold as Officer Ryan Hale pulled his cruiser behind a weathered, gray sedan on Route 47. The highway stretched endlessly in both directions, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the heart of rural Montana. Red and blue lights danced across the darkening landscape, casting eerie shadows on the tall grass that swayed in the autumn breeze. Ryan had been a police officer for 6 years now, ever since he graduated from the academy at 22. At 28, he'd seen his share of routine traffic stops, domestic disputes, and the occasional bar fight. But something about this particular evening felt different. Maybe it was the way the light hit the mountains in the distance, or the way the wind carried the scent of approaching rain. Whatever it was, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that this night would be unlike any other. He adjusted his utility belt and approached the driver's side window, his boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. The sedan was old, maybe 15 years or more, with rust eating away at the wheel wells and a rear bumper held on by what looked like duct tape and hope. The Montana license plate was barely visible beneath a layer of road dust. "License and registration, please," Ryan called out, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who'd done this countless times before. The window lowered with a mechanical whine that suggested the car's better days were long behind it. Inside, an older man sat hunched over the steering wheel. His hair was more gray than brown now, and deep lines etched themselves around his eyes like roads on a map. A graying beard covered the lower half of his face, and his clothes looked like they'd seen better decades. The man's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the glove compartment, and Ryan noticed they were the hands of someone who'd worked with them his entire life. Calloused, scarred, with dirt permanently embedded under the fingernails. There was something achingly familiar about those hands, though Ryan couldn't place why. I might not have everything you need," the man said, his voice rough like sandpaper. He avoided making eye contact, instead focusing on the documents in his lap. Ryan leaned slightly closer to the window, and that's when he saw it. A scar on the man's left cheek, shaped like a crescent moon. It was the kind of scar that told a story, probably from childhood, probably from falling off a bike, or running into a fence post while chasing fireflies on a summer night. His heart began to beat faster, though he couldn't understand why. There was something about the man's profile, the way he held his shoulders, the particular shade of his eyes when he finally glanced up. It was like looking at a ghost, or maybe a half-remembered dream. "Sir," Ryan said, his voice softer now. "Have we met before?" The man's grip tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the rhythmic clicking of the patrol car's hazard lights. When the man finally looked at Ryan directly, his eyes held a mixture of pain and recognition that made Ryan's stomach drop. It was the look of someone who'd been carrying a secret for so long that it had become part of him, heavy and familiar as an old coat. "No," the man said, but his voice cracked on the single word. "I don't think so." But Ryan knew he was lying. He could feel it in his bones, in the way his hands began to shake, in the way his mind started racing backward through years of memories, searching for a face that matched the one in front of him. He was 8 years old again, sitting on the front porch of their little house on Maple Street. His mother was inside, making dinner, and the smell of pot roast drifted through the screen door. He was waiting for his father to come home from work, the way he did every evening at 5:30. But 5:30 came and went, and then 6, and then 7. His father's pickup truck never turned into their driveway that night, or the next night, or ever again. Ryan remembered the police officers who came to the house, their faces grave and apologetic. He remembered his mother's tears, the way she held him so tight he could barely breathe. He remembered the endless questions from relatives and family friends, the whispered conversations that stopped when he entered a room. Most of all, he remembered waiting for his father to come home, to explain where he'd been, to ruffle his hair and tell him everything was going to be okay. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and eventually, even an 8-year-old boy learns that some people don't come back. The official explanation was that his father had suffered some kind of breakdown. The stress of work, of providing for a family, of trying to make ends meet in a town where good jobs were scarce. One day, he'd simply walked away from it all, leaving behind nothing but questions and a hole in Ryan's heart that had never quite healed. Now, 20 years later, Ryan found himself staring at a man who looked exactly like his father might look if he'd aged 2 decades on the road, if life had worn him down to his essential elements, if guilt and regret had carved themselves into his face like water carving through stone. "You look like someone I used to know," Ryan said, his voice barely above a whisper. The man's eyes filled with tears, and Ryan saw something break inside him. It was subtle, like a crack in a dam that starts small but grows until the whole structure gives way. "I need to see your license," Ryan said, though he wasn't sure he wanted to anymore. Part of him wanted to walk away, to return to his patrol car and drive off into the night, leaving this moment unclaimed and unexplored. But he couldn't. He was a police officer, and more than that, he was a son who'd spent 20 years wondering. The man reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. His hands were shaking so badly now that he dropped it twice before finally extracting his driver's license. He held it out to Ryan, and their fingers touched for just a moment when Ryan took it. Ryan looked down at the license, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The name read David Michael Hale. The address was for a motel in Billings, about 2 hours north. The photo was recent, but the face was unmistakable. It was his father. "Dad?" The word escaped Ryan's lips before he could stop it, small and broken and filled with 20 years of pain. David closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the headrest. "Ryan," he said, and the way he said it made it clear that this wasn't a chance encounter. He'd known who Ryan was the moment he'd seen him in the rearview mirror. "I saw you in the paper," David continued, his voice thick with emotion, "when you graduated from the academy. You look so proud in that uniform. I've been keeping track of you from a distance. I know that's not right, but I had to know you were okay." Ryan felt like he was drowning. 20 years of buried anger and hurt and longing rose to the surface all at once. "You left us," he said, and his voice sounded like that of the 8-year-old boy who'd waited on the porch. "You just left." "I know. Mom cried for months. She never got over it. She never remarried, never even dated anyone else. She said she was waiting for you to come home." David's shoulders shook, and Ryan realized he was crying. "I know. She died 3 years ago. Cancer. I sat with her every day in the hospital. And you know what she said to me the night before she died? She said, 'Tell your father I forgive him if you ever see him again.'" The silence that followed was deafening. On the highway, cars continued to pass, their headlights creating brief moments of illumination before disappearing into the darkness. But for Ryan and David, the world had shrunk to just the two of them and 20 years of unspoken words. "Why?" Ryan asked finally. "Why did you leave?" David wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I was drowning," he said. "I lost my job at the plant, and I couldn't find work anywhere else. We were about to lose the house, and I couldn't provide for you and your mother. I felt like such a failure. So you just ran away?" "I thought—" David's voice broke. "I thought if I left, maybe your mother could find someone better, someone who could take care of you both. I thought I was doing the right thing." Ryan wanted to scream, to rage at the selfishness of it, at the way his father had made a decision that destroyed their family without even consulting them. But looking at the broken man in front of him, he could see that David had been punishing himself for 20 years. His father looked like he'd aged 40 years instead of 20, like he'd been carrying the weight of his decision every single day. "I've been living in motels and cheap apartments," David continued, "working construction jobs, dishwashing, anything I could find. I've been sending money to a bank account I set up for you whenever I could. I don't know if you ever got it." Ryan thought about the mysterious deposits that had appeared in his account over the years. Small amounts, never more than $100 at a time, from an account he'd never been able to trace. He'd always assumed it was some kind of banking error. "The doctors said I have maybe 6 months," David said quietly. "Lung cancer. All those years of smoking, trying to numb the pain. I was driving through town because I wanted to see you one more time. I didn't plan for this to happen." Ryan felt the world spinning around him. His father was dying, and he'd been so close all these years, watching from the shadows, like a ghost haunting his own life. "I didn't want you to find me like this," David said, gesturing to his appearance, to the beat-up car, to the obvious signs of a life lived on the margins. "I wanted to remember you as successful, as someone who made it despite what I did to you." Ryan looked at his father, really looked at him, and saw not the monster he'd built up in his mind over the years, but a broken man who'd made a terrible decision and had been living with the consequences ever since. He saw someone who'd been as much a victim of his own choices as Ryan and his mother had been. "I became a police officer because of you," Ryan said suddenly, "because I wanted to help people find their way home, because I wanted to make sure other kids didn't have to wonder where their fathers went." David's face crumpled. "I'm so sorry, son. I'm so sorry." Ryan felt something inside him breaking open, a dam that had been holding back 20 years of pain and anger and love. He realized that he could choose to hold on to his rage, to let it define him for the rest of his life. Or he could choose something else. He walked around to the passenger side of the car and opened the door. "Move over," he said. David looked at him in confusion. "What?" "Move over. I'm driving." "Ryan, you're on duty. You can't just—" "I'm driving," Ryan repeated, and there was something in his voice that brooked no argument. David slid across to the passenger seat, and Ryan got behind the wheel. The car smelled like cigarettes and fast food and loneliness. On the dashboard was a small photo of Ryan's high school graduation, worn and faded from years of handling. "Where are we going?" David asked. Ryan started the engine and pulled onto the highway. "Home," he said. "We're going home." They drove in silence for a while, the lights of the small town growing closer with each mile. Ryan's mind was racing, trying to process everything that had happened, trying to figure out what came next. But for the first time in 20 years, he felt like he was moving toward something instead of away from it. "I don't expect forgiveness," David said, finally. "I don't deserve it." Ryan glanced at his father, seeing him clearly for the first time. "Mom was right," he said. "She said forgiveness isn't about what people deserve. It's about what you need to do to move forward." "I don't know how to be a father anymore," David said. "I don't know how to be anything anymore." "Then we'll figure it out together," Ryan said, "however much time we have." As they drove toward town, Ryan thought about the 8-year-old boy who'd waited on the porch all those years ago. That boy had been waiting for his father to come home. But maybe he'd been waiting for the wrong thing. Maybe home wasn't a place you went back to, but something you built together, piece by piece, with whatever time you had left. The highway stretched out before them, no longer endless and empty, but leading somewhere specific, leading home. And for the first time in 20 years, Ryan wasn't driving alone. Behind them, the patrol car sat empty on the side of the road, its lights still flashing red and blue against the darkening sky. But Ryan knew that someone would find it eventually, would make sure it got back to the station. Right now, he had more important things to do. He had a father to bring home, and a lifetime of conversations to catch up on, and only 6 months to do it in. But sometimes, 6 months can be enough to heal 20 years of hurt, if you're willing to try. The town lights grew brighter as they approached, and Ryan felt something he hadn't felt in 2 decades. Hope. Not the naive hope of a child waiting for someone who might never come home, but the mature hope of a man who understands that sometimes the best endings are really just new beginnings. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.